Hello, everybody. Welcome to Kembali 2020, a Rebuild Bali Festival, a digital program designed to inspire, excite, reconnect, and revitalize the Balinese and Indonesian community from October 29 to November 8, 2020. Kembali, the Indonesian word for return or come back, represents the revitalization in the face of global challenges. The festival will reunite people in Bali and Indonesia together with an international audience at a time when travel is largely impossible and creating connections is more important than ever before. Hi, I'm Selena Agatan, and I'm the founder and managing director of MAP PH, where we work to revitalize supply chains and regenerate supply chains around the world. I'd like to introduce our guest this session. We're with Adam Leith Gollner. He's the author of the Book of Immortality and the Fruit Hunters. He has written for the New York Times, the Paris Review, Vanity Fair, the Smithsonian, the Guardian, Lucky Peach, and the New Yorker Online. He used to be editor of Vice magazine and also played in a number of bands. He currently lives in Montreal. So bonjour, how are you doing?
Hello, bonjour, as we say here in Quebec. I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It's been a while since we've seen each other, and it was actually through the Fruit Hunters movie. So many of you might be coming into this seeing the movie first or having read the book. But for those of you who haven't read this wonderful book, it was actually ranked the New York Times National Bestseller Editor's Choice. And it's in how many languages, Adam?
I think maybe a half a dozen languages. It's in Japanese, Korean, there's a Taiwanese edition coming out, there's Cantonese, there's Portuguese, there's maybe five or six.
Excellent. So yeah, many of our viewers can order the book and enjoy the book actually after this wonderful movie as well. So what made you write this wonderful book, Adam?
Well, the answer to this question really takes us back 20 years in time to 21 years in time to the year 1999, which is when I found myself in Brazil. And the story of how I came to write the book is itself the beginning of the book, which is something that I really loved in the act of writing the book. I gotta say that the act of writing the book is the act of finding the story, and that as you go forward pursuing an idea, you immediately get lost and enter into some other world than you had expected to be in, which is how I ended up in this story in Brazil, in another country, and noticing all the fruit that they had there that was so different from the fruit that we have here in Montreal, Canada, in the Northern Hemisphere. And at the time, I was a young reporter and writer, journalist, and I thought it just seemed like a kind of interesting potential subject. And as I started digging into it a little bit, that's what a cub reporter does, actually. That's a cub reporter gesture. You dig in and you try to find something that ends up becoming a book that takes the next 8 years of your life, which you didn't realize was going to happen. But yeah, I found that there were some very interesting characters in the world of fruit. Who would have thought? It seemed very unexpected. And it seemed to me really, Selena, like it was clearly a story that just hadn't been told yet. And I was like, oh, well, this is how a book comes to be. You are a writer, you see a story, there are characters, there's action, there's drama, there is conflict. And it's something that is very meaningful also to you as a writer, which is what it became to me. It became a very important part of my life. And so I spent, like I said, the next 8 years working on it.
And we meet a cast of characters in the movie that were also part of the book. So was there a common thread that ran through the various fruit hunters that you came across?
Yeah. So at first, I saw them because I didn't know them that well. I didn't understand them. They were just kind of eccentric people, and that is what initially attracted me to them. Is I was like, oh, they are obsessive people who are fascinated with fruit, and they are willing to go to any length possible to procure the object of their desire, which happens to be fruits of all things. And I thought that was kind of fun, I guess, on a superficial level. But then as I entered into that world with them and joined them and interviewed them and learned about what it is that makes them tick, I realized that there is a thread that unites them on a deeper level, which is that they're all people who are concerned with diversity, and whether it be preserving diversity or in a way celebrating diversity or maintaining diversity or conserving diversity, just in a variety of ways, they're all people who have an engagement with the idea of diversity in the natural world. And they're kind of reminders of our connection to the natural world. Although they may seem like they're just odd and unique characters, they have something important to teach us about our role in this planet, on this planet, as stewards and as I don't want to say custodians, but just as fellow species co-inhabiting this planet that we have evolved on together. They are people who understand clearly that we would not be here without those fruits, without those plants, without that diversity.
And as we saw in the movie, you traveled also referencing so many remote locations. And these beautiful rare fruits are in some of the most endangered areas in the world that overlay with rich biodiversity and indigenous and remote farming communities. So what were some of the challenges that you saw the communities face during your visit?
That's a really interesting question. So one of the things that I was looking at mainly was I guess when I was going to these remote places, was trying to look at the methods that the fruit hunters, this community themselves used. And oftentimes that meant that they were going to try to find a very rare fruit, a fruit that isn't available commercially. And so they are often fruits that aren't necessarily even being farmed. They are fruits that are growing in the wild. Sometimes they're maybe grown on a very small scale, or they're in somebody's backyard. One of the classic examples I can think of is in the Seychelles. There's a fruit there called the coco de mer, which is I could go get it if you'd like. Should I run and go grab it?
Yeah.
It's called
it's a very interesting looking fruit.
You know what? I'm gonna unplug this for a moment. I'll be right back.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I've actually seen this fruit in Seychelles. Wow, you actually have an actual coco de mer. Wow.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
I can, yeah.
Okay, so this is the coco de mer. This is God. This is just I mean, on the one hand, it looks like you can see what it looks like. It's the world's biggest seed. I don't know if you can see. Let me see if I can get that sticker to go in there. God, so counterintuitive. Okay, so can you read that?
Go a little bit closer. Okay, I can see the number.
Okay, so that's a permit.
There's a permit, yeah.
That is an export permit. So this is a very interesting example of a fruit that connects commercial interests with wilderness. So this is not this seed, which grows inside a large coconut, is not this is the seed of a fruit, and this is not a fruit that can be farmed. It's a fruit that it grows wild. But what's interesting about it is that when you buy one of these, you are supporting conservation efforts of this endangered species. So what happens is that this is a very tightly controlled thing in the Seychelles, where they are using the power of commerce and tourism, which is obviously a big part of the economy in the Seychelles. And they're saying we can get tourists to finance conservation efforts in the wild forests that remain, in the Coco de Mer forests where these grow. And so they early on realized they had to protect this habitat. And one of the ways that you can protect it is by getting money from tourists to buy the seed, which has, you know, served its purpose. It's hollowed out. It's been here for 15 years in my living room. But oftentimes that's an example of a challenge and maybe a solution. So the challenge is the forests are increasingly shrinking all around the tropical regions where you have the greatest diversity. So one of the things I didn't know when I started this book is that as you get closer to the equator, into the tropical regions, like diversity really exponentially grows. And that's where you have the most amount. You have so many species of everything. There's like a real concentration of animal and plant species. And here where we live in temperate Canada, there's not that great of a diversity. Like we don't experience diversity like they do in tropical forests, especially. So as these forests have been increasingly contracting and disappearing, you lose diversity. So one of the things that the fruit hunters, all of them, are concerned with is trying to find ways, first off, to protect the diversity that is disappearing, that has been disappearing, but also to prevent further losses from occurring. So this is an example of a successful conservation effort. The Coco de Mer has been generally saved, as far as, I mean, at least when I was there reporting it. And I think that the status has remained stable ever since. And there's a whole world of stories in there, but there's a lot of examples of this. And it's basically that the most interesting stuff is in the wild, it's in the wilderness, and it's just beginning. Maybe it's farmed on some very small scale. So one of the challenges that those remote farming communities might face, for example, would be that they may be growing a crop that's very useful, but that is unknown elsewhere. And that maybe has no real commercial viability outside the area. And it's not a crop that could necessarily withstand the requirements of shipping and handling and commercialization and refrigeration and cold chain storage and all of that, everything that these commercial fruits require. So I don't know. I mean, that's one of the fascinating things is this is where ingenuity comes in. Human ingenuity is finding solutions to individual issues. And the Coco de Mer is one example of that. But I think, and I suspect, that many remote farming communities face similar challenges, especially in terms of the rare fruits that they might be growing.
Yeah, I actually have an interesting example of that, where it's a similar flower that actually grows in Indonesia as well. It's called the Blue Pea Flower, and it's used in many Indonesian ceremonies as a natural dye. It's got this really vivid shade of blue. But what's interesting about it is when you add acid to it, like lemon, it actually turns pink. So I don't know if you came across that in your travels, but we were looking to help. Yeah.
I think, is it what they use to make rice blue?
Yes, yes, yeah. So looking at larger ways to support smallholder and indigenous farms, we actually turned to gin. So we use that to dye, to naturally dye an indigenous made gin in the Philippines.
I love that. Well, I mean,
And,
that really is a perfect example of ingenuity on a local scale, and it's a lovely story. I remember when I first saw an image of blue rice, I was just like, wow, like it's also a reminder of how I guess how big our planet is, that there are all these things all over the place that we don't know about. I mean, that's one of the messages of the fruit hunters, is that even though we are losing a lot of habitat and we are losing diversity and we are facing some very serious consequences, we still live in a world in which there is so much diversity that people have not heard of currently, that has not been lost, that exists, that we don't even know about. That's kind of it's an interesting kind of catch-22, but we are living in a wonderful time in terms of diversity, even though there has been loss. I think the message that we're hearing from scientists and from science and from people who've been observing climate change is this moment is perilous, because right now it is like this, but it could very quickly, within our lifetimes, within this century, we could get into an irreversible kind of situation where this will all be lost. And so that's what's interesting about it. We live in a world that is full of an incredible diversity that we need to celebrate. So I don't think that this story, The Fruit Hunters, comes at people with a message of, impending doom. It comes more with a message of, let's notice the riches that are all around us in our backyards all over the world. But let's also be aware that this diversity does need to be protected and cherished.
And speaking of diversity, the pandemic has actually brought about also important conversations that we're finally having around Black Lives Matter and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Mm-hmm. And especially because it's these communities that are actually growing the food that we eat that have also been the most at risk. Some of the most affected communities during the pandemic. So seeing this shift in the type of voices and the stories that we're hearing, how do you see this shifting how culinary history is being written about?
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing to be seeing, and it is really a natural segue from the diversity of the natural world to the diversity of the human world. And I do think that the Fruit Hunters is also about diversity within humanity, not just diversity within the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. It is about the importance of diversity in humankind. So these eccentric characters are themselves examples of diversity within us. But yeah, I mean, as somebody who wrote a book celebrating diversity in all of its forms, I am, a person who, on the one hand, has looked on in horror at what's happening in the United States, but also in hope that some of what is happening, some of the messages that are coming out of there that are so important to be heard are potentially being heard in my industry. And so I look at the publishing industry and I feel like I'm seeing an industry, and we were talking about this earlier, I'm just a writer in my room, I'm just I guess an onlooker and an observer, and but somebody who has told stories about diversity and about places that are maybe on the margins, or marginalized voices or marginalized characters. And I notice that my industry seems to be reacting in certain cases very swiftly and trying to make important changes. And so I think of, I look at Vanity Fair, which is where I've done a couple of stories recently, and I'm I feel proud to be a part of that publication because I think that, their most recent issue that was guest edited by Ta-Nehisi Coates is a really great example of things that the publishing industry needs to be doing and should have been doing long ago, but at least it is happening now. And so it's interesting to see that happening. I think if we talk about culinary history and food writing, I mean, if we're talking about how the publishing world engages with what is happening, I think there's a lot of work still to be done. I don't think that we have, I mean, I haven't been a food writer for a number of years, partially for this reason, partially because I think there's a lack of outlets that allow for there to be meaningful stories that are, whether it be political or cultural or social, stories that perhaps challenge the status quo, or stories that present narratives that are outside the mainstream, or stories that could somehow, touch somebody on some level that isn't just commercial, which is what most of the at least if we think about the dominant big American publications, which are the ones that have the budget to pay writers, I think that it's a little bit, it's time for them to be transforming. And it seems like we're at a bit of a crossroads, and I'm hopeful for the future. I'm hopeful because there is such a richness of story material out there. I think that the world of culinary history is one that it's a lens through which we can learn a lot about how the world got to be the way it is today. I don't think there's a lot of outlets currently allowing those stories to be told, but I think there are a lot of stories out there that should be told. So I think that my hope is that we're somehow moving there. I mean, I don't know what the publications are that are willing to, publish those stories currently, because I don't have anywhere that, lets me write about food anymore. Nobody wants me to write food stories. Nobody wants those stories. I worked at Lucky Peach when it was around, and they wanted those stories, and I think they did a great job with those stories. And I think that the people from that world, I think specifically of Chris Ying and Rachel Kong, who were two editors who I worked with closely. I also worked with Peter Meehan, who we've all heard the disgrace in which he has left this milieu, but I never experienced that side of him, it has to be said, but again, I'm just a freelancer in my, working in my bathtub, basically. I'm not a person in an office in New York City working with people, but the editors that I did work with there were great and really did want these kinds of stories. So we know that readers want these stories. We know that writers want to be telling these stories, especially writers from diverse backgrounds. We want to be hearing from them, and they want to be sharing these important stories. The piece that needs to fall in line with that is that the publications that have the money to be able to pay for these stories need to dare to publish them. And let's see, maybe these big American food magazines will get there next. It's not impossible.
Or somewhere else in the world where now more than ever, people are looking to heritage and culture for that connection. And especially with food now in the middle of the pandemic, we're looking at food as comfort. But there's also opportunities with food because it intersects so many different social issues. And yet we all have an opinion on food. And perhaps looking through the rare fruit and the story of the fruit hunters will help lead us in that path where we have a greater share of voice among the folks that are part of this really rich community that have shaped our culinary history for the last 500 years.
Yeah, I mean, what a lovely kind of intention to set, what a lovely intention to imagine. I think that absolutely the Fruit Hunters is a book about what can be done in the face of monocultures, in the face of industrialization, in the face of these kind of bland, technological kind of just, you know, militaristic things that happen in this world. You know, what are the interesting, unusual, unexpected solutions or ideas or insights that can occur? And so, you know, I think that we know that the world is losing habitat, and we know that we need to preserve those wild spaces. I think that's, if I could say what the Fruit Hunters was, is that it was in a way a kind of a prayer for wild spaces and wilderness, and humans having a place within that, you know, a place that is not that doesn't need to be controlling and destructive, but that can be nurturing and understanding of it, that can protect those wild spaces and allow them to do what they want, to allow them to have their place, and for their needs to be met, and for us to be smart enough to understand that needs to happen. So I don't know. I mean, on the other hand, you know, you never know. I mean, this is the thing, there are these kind of fundamental forces converging, and some of them are the forces for heritage and for authenticity or truth and beauty and small beautiful things, and then there are the forces of uniformity and repetition and just, you know, the McDonald's of the world, you know, that just want to feed you toxic chemicals. And so in a way, it's like, you know, these are big, giant, impossible kind of tectonic forces at play. And all we can do is sort of try to engage with them, whether it's, you know, working on a small remote farming community or working with farming communities in remote places, or whether it's telling stories that we believe really matter, stories that have touched us deeply and that we therefore feel matter, even if it makes no sense to anybody when you are embarking on them. Which, let me tell you, when I told people I was writing a book about fruits, everybody was like, okay, loser, you know. And but, you know, I think that's important. You know, we have to follow our truths and follow our bliss, and even if it doesn't make much sense.
Well, there are beautiful examples that are thriving in Bali, where there is that balance of commerce, of culture, and also of community. And we're seeing more and more smaller communities hopefully grow. I mean, the pandemic has definitely set back the progress, some say by 20 years in many communities, but we do hope that even through our audience here, that there is more of a force moving forward to have that representation from the communities themselves, to have them empowered to actually leverage their rich history, their rich biodiversity, to look at new ways of prosperity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what a sentiment to harness biodiversity for new ways of prosperity. I mean, that's a beautiful desire, and in a way, you know, it's outside of capitalism, or it is in tandem with capitalism, but it's not necessarily, you know, it's a new way of thinking, and I think that's what's so interesting, and that's what the world is hungering for, and that's what great stories are about. You know, they change our way of looking at the world, they change our way of thinking. And so, yeah, whether it's a kind of concrete action like that, or an attempted narrative, both of them can have similar impacts. And I think that if our intentions are pure, that we can do beautiful things.
Well, next year actually marks the 500th anniversary of the Spanish galleon trade, which really began this global search for spices and flavors around the world. And so we look forward to hearing more stories from those communities and about those communities, and hope to see many more interesting stories in the coming years as we commemorate that very important day in history. But Adam, you've got an exciting project coming up.
Yes, I do. I guess you're referring to a new book that I have coming out in, I guess, 3 weeks on November 7th, which might be the very day that this is screening. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, so this is perfect. We've timed it perfectly. So we are launching.
That was our plan all along. Yeah.
This is the book launch, the virtual book launch.
Yeah.
If I didn't feel terrible about running to go get the cover, I could go get it. But I have a new book that is coming out, which is it's a book of conversations with a writer I admire very much, who is also a Montrealer like myself. His name is Danny Laferrière. He is Haitian born, and he is one of the great writers from Quebec, and is recognized as such in the francophone world, but isn't well known in the English speaking world. But I, being a person who lives here in this province, which is a place, well, so for those who aren't aware, Quebec, we are a French speaking place, and I am a member of the official language minority here as an English speaker, which seems weird anywhere else in North America to say that, but this is a place where this is a French speaking place. And so we have this great author here whose name is Danny Laferrière, who has actually been at the Bali Literary Festival, which we are, what is it called when it's not called Kimbali 20?
Ubud Writers and Readers Festival.
The Ubud Writers and Readers Festival. Danny Laferrière has been there. Janet Denif told me so when she saw the cover of the book when I posted it on my Instagram. She said, "Oh, he was here," and so he's a national treasure, both in Quebec and in Canada, and certainly in Montreal, but not necessarily that well known amongst English speakers. So this is a book of conversations with him where we kind of explore not just his books, but also his thinking and his ideas. And it's a chance for English speaking readers to engage with the ideas of this extremely brilliant writer who we are so blessed to have amongst us.
How do people stay in touch with you, Adam?
Oh, usually I get Morse code transmissions, transoceanic. I love those. But otherwise, people can find me on Instagram. That's, I'm there. My name, Adam Gollner.
Okay, well, thanks for taking this time. And again, thank you for writing that wonderful book. All the messages in that book resonate. It's more important now than ever, and I hope everybody enjoyed the movie today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for screening the film. It's an honor to be here, and it's great to speak with you, Selena.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Kimbali 20 was made possible with the support of the Yayasan Mudra Swari Saraswati Patron Program and their donors. The Patron Program was created to seek assistance for the survival of both festivals and the foundation. By making a valuable contribution to the Yayasan Patron Program, you will be directly involved in delivering both festivals in due time. Your contribution will guarantee the future of Indonesia's most meaningful cross-cultural platform of words, ideas, culture, and the creative arts. Follow at Ubud Writers Festival on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or visit ubudwritersfestival.com for more information about the Patron Program.
Woohoo!
Okay, thank you.
Bye, Selena.
Okay, bye.
That was great. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Bye.